The boy's name was Emeka, a name echoing strength in the Igbo tongue, great deeds, and one he wore like invisible armor. At 13, Emeka was the kind of boy who listened more than he spoke. His eyes said things his mouth never dared to. His friends called him silent radio because, like a radio left on in the background, his thoughts were always running, waiting for someone to tune in. He lived with his grandmother in the quiet, sun-bleached village of Umudim, nestled between hills that often glowed orange under the setting sun. Umudim had secrets, old ones, buried beneath centuries of tradition and silence. And Emeka, though he didn't know it yet, was tied to those secrets by something older than blood, language. His grandmother, Mama Ifeoma, was a revered storyteller and one of the last fluent speakers of Owerre Igbo, a dialect rapidly vanishing into oblivion. Every evening, she would call him to her mat by the fire and say, come and hear what your tongue remembers. Then she'd tell stories, not the watered-down fables from schoolbooks, but stories that breathed, danced, and lived. They were riddles of war, poems of the sky, chants of the forest. Emeka didn't just listen. He learned. He spoke back. Fluently. And he remembered. But the world outside Umudim didn't value such things. Not anymore. One dry Tuesday morning, government jeeps rolled into Umudim like thunderclouds. Men in suits and sunglasses stepped out, carrying tablets and speaking through walkie-talkies like soldiers. They came to install a new highway, one that would run right through the hills and, in the process, displace everything, including Emeka's home. They gave speeches about progress and integration and development, but the villagers heard only demolition. Mama Ifeoma stood among the gathering, lips tightly sealed, eyes on the hills. Emeka stood beside her, watching her frown deepen. They won't stop, she whispered, unless something stops them first. That night, Emeka couldn't sleep. He heard his grandmother praying in Igbo, not like a ritual, but like she was speaking to someone who understood her grief. He closed his eyes and whispered with her. The next morning, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just her favorite wrapper missing from the line and her storytelling mat rolled up. They searched the hills. They called the police. Nothing. Just gone. 3 days after her disappearance, Emeka was still wandering the forest like a ghost, retracing his grandmother's favorite paths. He stumbled upon a cave, one he'd never seen before, even though he knew the forest like his palm. He stepped in, flashlight flickering. The cave walls were covered in markings. Symbols. Writings. All in Owerre Igbo. Whole songs written in circles. Emeka read them aloud. Suddenly, a groan. A low, ancient sound. And the earth shook. A slab of stone shifted in the back of the cave, revealing a hidden passage. He wanted to run. But something stronger, his grandmother's voice in his memory, pulled him forward. Inside, he found an underground chamber filled with relics, figurines, scrolls, drums, and in the center, a stone pedestal bearing a cracked mirror. Just beneath it, a pendant glowed faintly. Then a hand clamped over his mouth. "Who sent you?" a gruff voice snarled. 2 men in black. Not from the village. Not from the government either. Foreign. Emeka struggled. One of the men pulled out a tablet and spoke in a foreign language. "This boy knows how to read it," the other muttered. He read the wall. "How? He must be from the lineage. What do we do with him? Keep him quiet. Or use him?" They tied his hands and began arguing in English, assuming he didn't understand. But Emeka had attended school. He knew enough. They were treasure hunters, mercenaries of culture. They believed the cave held the Linguistic Talisman of Igwe, a mythical artifact said to control language and memory. It had been hidden for centuries, protected by a spell that only a fluent speaker could unlock. They had waited years for someone like Emeka. Locked in the cave with one flashlight and the hum of generators in the distance, Emeka lay tied up and bleeding from a small cut on his forehead. They brought him food and asked questions. He said nothing. But he listened. And remembered. That night, one of the men left to make a call. The other sat by the entrance, drinking and talking to himself. That was when Emeka heard a voice. Very soft. Very familiar. And He looked around. Grandma? He followed the sound with his eyes and saw, etched faintly on the cave wall, the outline of her face. Moving. Speaking. Obugi, Emeka. It's you. I knew you'd come. It wasn't magic. It was a message. Recorded into the stone using old dialect chants. She had left it for him. She spoke of the talisman, of the cave, of its sacredness. They want to steal what our tongue remembers. But our tongue is our sword. Speak it and you will awaken it. That night, when the men returned, they brought the pendant to Emeka. Speak, one said. Translate the markings. He closed his eyes and began. Obdm Uto, Maka na susu aniagagi fu. Aninaya su Igbo dindu. The walls trembled. The pendant glowed hot. And then, a blast of wind from the tunnel knocked the men backward. The cave roared, echoing words spoken by long-dead voices. The men screamed. One tried to shoot, but the bullet turned to dust midair. Then silence. They were gone. Emeka stumbled out of the cave by dawn. The pendant still hung around his neck, warm like a heartbeat. The cave had sealed itself behind him, its markings faded, like it had gone back to sleep. A search party found him by noon, unconscious under a palm tree. When he woke, he was in a hospital bed. He told the villagers everything. Some believed. Most didn't. But then Mama Ifeoma returned. She had gone into hiding, knowing the artifact would lure danger. She had left clues only Emeka could follow, trusting his tongue, their shared language, to save them both. The government project was mysteriously cancelled days later. Rumors swirled about federal agents disappearing in the hills. The villagers whispered. But no one ever went back to the cave. Emeka became a local hero. But he didn't care about fame. He cared about remembering. So he started a group called Asusu Nchita, the language remembers. He taught children to speak Owerre Igbo. He wrote stories. He recorded chants. He spoke to stones and listened when they spoke back. He had been saved by his language. And he swore it would never be forgotten. After Emeka's return, the village of Umudim buzzed with uneasy energy. The elders, who had long dismissed tales of the linguistic talisman as myths, now met in secret to discuss what Emeka had seen. They summoned him one evening to the Obi, the village square, where all matters of importance were judged. Emeka arrived wearing a plain shirt, his pendant tucked under it, heartbeat pulsing in rhythm with its warmth. Emeka, said the eldest, Enzo Keke, his face lined like the bark of a baobab tree. You say the cave called to you. That your grandmother left a message. That the language came alive. Emeka nodded. I did not lie. A younger elder scoffed. You expect us to believe a tongue can move mountains? Emeka stepped forward. Not mountains. Memories. What you call myth I walked through. He turned to the wall of the Obi and began to speak in deep Owerre Igbo, using proverbs only the oldest among them would know. Asusa biyundu. Onaim kam uodirin de enemiani. Language is life. It keeps the spirit alive within us. Enzo Keke's eyes widened. My grandfather said that to me, once. No child has spoken that since the war. I remember, Emeka said, because she remembered. And she gave it to me. There was a long silence. Then a slow clap from the edge of the crowd. Mama Ifeoma stepped forward. I taught the boy. But the cave tested him. He was not chosen by me. He was chosen by the tongue itself. The council bowed their heads. That night, the elders declared Emeka the keeper of the voice, a title not bestowed in over 200 years. But titles are not protection. The men in black may have vanished, but others were watching. A week later, a black SUV rolled into the nearest town, Okigwe. 3 foreigners stepped out, dressed as academics. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and an angular jaw, asked for directions to Umudim. Linguistic researchers, she told the local police. Doing a study on endangered dialects. But they weren't researchers. They were collectors. Part of a global network of linguistic pirates who harvested dying languages, extracted their spiritual symbols, and sold them to occult museums or buried governments that dealt in memory manipulation. And they had heard of Emeka. They arrived in Umudim as tourists, carrying fancy cameras and offering grants to the community. One of them even offered Emeka a scholarship to study abroad. "All we want is access to the cave," said the woman. Emeka smiled politely. "What cave?" She smiled back. "You don't need to lie. We have footage. From a satellite drone. We saw it open. And close. Then go open it again," he said. But that night they returned. Not as tourists. As thieves. The pendant around Emeka's neck began to burn as he slept. He woke in a sweat, heart pounding, light flickering across the walls. Voices. Foreign. Aggressive. Footsteps outside. They were in the compound. He grabbed the pendant and whispered an incantation his grandmother once taught him. Cheda. No guide. Mipi Yuzo. Remember. Remain. Open the way. A pulse of wind shot from the pendant, knocking his door open. The air shimmered. 2 intruders stood at the doorway, stunned. Then the pendant spoke, not in words but in sound, a high-pitched wail of whistles and drums. The men clutched their heads and dropped to their knees. Then disappeared. Literally. In a blink. The villagers rushed in, finding Emeka alone and unharmed. But now it was clear, the pendant wasn't just a key. It was a guardian. A living archive of all the forgotten words and chants of his ancestors, one that reacted to threats like an immune system protecting a memory. Mama Ifeoma came to him, tears in her eyes. "You are no longer a boy, Emeka. You are the last sentence in a book we must not let close." 2 days later, the cave called again. Not with sound, but in dreams. Villagers across Umudim, young and old, woke with fragments of verses in their minds. Snippets of lost stories, dreams of drumming, whispers in dialects they didn't even know they knew. The hills vibrated. The ground hummed. Mama Ifeoma declared it time. She gathered the council, the children, and Emeka and led them to the cave. It had unsealed itself. Inside, the walls had changed. The markings had grown. The mirror on the pedestal was whole now, glowing like a silver moon. Emeka stepped forward. He placed the pendant into the center groove. Then he turned to the crowd and said, "Our language is not dying. It is dreaming. Let us wake it." One by one, villagers stepped forward to speak their oldest words. A woman recited a birth song. An old man told a joke only his grandfather used to laugh at. Children sang lullabies. Mama Ifeoma chanted a dirge that made the cave walls weep. The mirror pulsed. And then from its depth, a voice emerged. "Emeka, you have remembered. And so we return." The cave shuddered, then settled. And from the walls burst a stream of words, living, moving, glowing, like fireflies. They swirled around Emeka, then entered the villagers. Each person gasped as memories they never lived flowed into them. Ancestral echoes, knowledge of herbs, songs of the stars, blueprints of ancient towns, even lost games and dances. It was the archive. The real talisman. Not an object, but a collective memory guarded by language, activated only when the tongue that birthed it was truly remembered. The cave, having fulfilled its duty, began to crumble. They fled just in time. News of the event could not be hidden. Satellite footage showed the collapse of the hill. The government came to investigate, but the villagers had already crafted their story, a natural landslide. Emeka, however, became something else. Not a prophet, not a messiah, but a teacher. He traveled across Nigeria, then beyond, teaching dying languages, helping tribes resurrect their stories, rebuilding cultural libraries with spoken words. He spoke to elders in the north, traders in the west, fishermen in the delta. Wherever he went, he whispered, "If your language dies, so does your soul. And your children will speak, but they will never truly be heard." When he turned 20, he spoke at the United Nations, delivering a speech in 10 different indigenous Nigerian languages. The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. But Emeka always returned to Umudim, where children now ran barefoot, singing in dialects that once teetered on extinction. Where stones still whispered, and trees still remembered. Where one boy had once been tied up in a cave and saved, not by a gun or a god, but by the voice of his people, and by the power of remembering. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell for newly created content.